Authors Press.
Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio, welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. And on the line with us today, we have Debbie Hickman. We'll be discussing her fantastic book, The Exasperated Clock. And I will say, Debbie was brought to People of Distinction today by some of the best movers in the business. Authors Press Publishing. If you have a book that you'd like moved, well, move it through Authors Press. You can find them at authorspress.com. And guys, listen, it is an absolute pleasure and such a delight to have Debbie here on the line, because the book we're going to be discussing today, The Exasperated Clock, listen, it's going to be a fun-filled journey for everybody involved, okay? Now, primarily, it's a children's book, okay? So it's going to be geared for children, but I'm not going to lie. During the pre-screening call, just listening to her go through all of the nuances of the book, I'm kind of intrigued to buy it for myself. Is that bad? I don't know. But listen, it's a fun-filled journey that we're all going to love taking. Your children are going to love taking. It's a fantastic gift idea for anybody who has kids. I mean, listen, what more can be said? I'm going to just go ahead, introduce Debbie right now, because listen, she's the expert on the matter. She's going to be able to articulate all the nuances of her book much better than I ever could. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Debbie, first and foremost, thank you so much for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction. How are you?
Well, I'm fine, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here. I love to talk about my books.
Well, listen, we're very much looking forward to listening to you talk about your books, okay? This is great, and let's jump right in, okay? Now, before we go into the book itself, let's hold off slightly. Let's build that temptation just a little bit more. Tell our listening audience a little bit about yourself, Debbie.
Oh, easy. I grew up in northern Idaho, Lewiston, and I, did the usual stuff there. My life has probably been full of lots of other culture adventures, and I am presently in Arizona, but for about 11 years I was on the Navajo reservation teaching, and then I went overseas and I taught in places like Kuwait, Turkey, Kazakhstan, and Malaysia. And I have read this story to kids actually all over that part of the world. Because I started writing this first book when I was on the Navajo reservation, which is in northern Arizona. And it lifted me. The kids just fueled my energy because they loved it so much. And and grandparents say, oh, you know what? They'll call me and say, oh, well, I've got to read that book again tonight. That's what my kid wants to read. So anyway, I've been around the world quite a bit, but I've also taught in the States, and now I'm presently in Arizona, southern Arizona.
Fantastic. Debbie, thank you so much for sharing. And really quick, I just want to make sure that I say this before we go any further. I'm not an educator myself, not anymore. I did teach college for 3 years. I taught fourth graders for 1 year. My significant other, she's a teacher. She's been teaching for about 15 years now. She teaches high school. And let me just be the first to tell you here on our show that teachers don't get nearly the amount of respect and credit that they deserve for the amount of work that they have to put in. I mean, it is quite the feat for everything that they do. So thank you so much for everything that you've been able to do to really shape and mold young minds.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I started writing this book when I retired, because I was too busy and too tired to do just about any kind of real writing. And since then, I've written, of course, 4 books. But this was my first one, and the kids just loved it so much that I said, I got to do it. I have no excuses now as soon as I retired. And they have certainly fueled me, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
But yeah, they like it, and for all kinds of reasons. I could go into them right now if you want.
Absolutely. There you have it. Guys, let's not wait any longer. Let's jump right in. The Exasperated Clock. Tell us about your book.
Oh, the book is, first of all, when I start reading the book to kids and they go, the Exasperated Clock, and I've had people say, well, isn't that a kind of a big word for little kids, like kindergartners, first graders, second graders, love it. I always say, well, just listen to the story and I'll bet you'll understand what the exasperated word means. And of course, they all get it. But it's probably because I was a teacher I wrote this book, because this is a clock who no longer has numbers that are pretty much statues on their clock. They are friends, and they have personalities, and they start acting out. And they make a lot of noise, and they're playing cards, and they're doing all kinds of crazy things, singing, doing somersaults. I mean, it just goes on and on. And she yells at them and says, oh, my goodness, you really have to behave yourself. And then 8 is running around the clock, and he's bumping people off the clock. And she says, 8, look what you're doing. And he says, oh, yeah, just call me Crazy 8. So they have some conversation. Oh, by the way, 9 and 5 play cards on the clock. I mean, it was really getting out of hand. I mean, now, if you've ever been a teacher, some days you feel like this.
Absolutely.
And then they got into arguments. 12 and 1 got, this is my favorite page, 12 and 1 got into an argument because 12 said, I'm the most important number on the clock because I have special names like midnight and noon. And then 1 growls at him and says, hey, haven't you heard number 1 is unbeatable? And then 0 from the 10, who steps up and says, no, I hold the most important place among you. And they have conversations like, what? You're nothing. You're just a big 0. And then she explains how 0 is something, but nothing is nothing. Anyway, the kids really like that part. But anyway, eventually the numbers never behave, and she's screaming at them a lot of times, saying, act dignified. And so she starts throwing them off the clock one by one. And, of course, they don't like it very much. This is getting very, very, very scary for them. And eventually they're all off the clock. And they're on their own now. And they've got to figure out what they're going to do with their life. And so all of the numbers go out in the world, and they find themselves a job that seems about right. The first number that went out was 8. And 8 made it all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and he got a job helping a friendly octopus keep track of itself. And at that point, if you're reading this to children, they go, I get it. I mean, they're so excited to get this association with 8 and an octopus. And then eventually all the numbers go out, and they all get little interesting jobs. My next book is about 7, and I'll just tell you what 7 does. 7 gets a job working for Snow White. And she does it for a while, but then that prince comes along, and she goes all gaga over the prince, so she didn't care how many dwarfs she had. She didn't have to have 7 of them. So anyway, then he goes and gets a job with the days of the week, but he falls asleep because he's just tired. It gets kind of boring, and, some days there were only 5 days that showed up. Anyway, he gets fired from that job. And so in the beginning of my 7 book, 7 is miserable, and he's lost his job, and he's just having a horrible time. So there's a lot of emotions in these books, but they all turn out very well. Another one is 6. And in fact, that's my latest book. But 6 got a job working for insects because he was very curious how they moved with 6 legs, although you don't have to tell the kids about that. They get the joke right away that if he's working for insects, their little hands go up and go, I know what the connection is. And anyway, that's a long story, but it's my latest book. And then 10, this is what's so fun about working with numbers. 10 has to go to the penitentiary. And yes, there's a lot of words that have the word 10 in them. But as it turns out, only one was the one who was slowly basically slowly robbing the bank, because every day he would come in and take maybe 1 dime extra, and then he took 2 dimes extra, and then 4 dimes, you know how that adds up, 8 dimes. Anyway, they figured him out, and they called the police, and the police came, and they had to go to court. And as it turns out, one got sentenced, you hear the T-E-N in it, and for 10 months in the penitentiary. And 0, because she had nothing to do with this, got no time. She didn't have to serve any time. Anyway, so the book goes on like that. The kids just love that one. But the other numbers, all of them have something that is, associated with that number. I can tell you a couple more here if we want to.
Debbie,
I don't know, Benji, did you want to interrupt?
Absolutely. Listen, I'm gonna jump in real quickly. This is all absolutely incredible, right? This is fantastic. And as you were going through and you're speaking of your stories, the only thing that kept coming to mind, I was like, you are a modern day Dr. Seuss, right? And I mean that in a very, of course, complimentary way. Your stories are wildly imaginative, right? And so much fun. And I just remember being a child myself, and, listen, it almost seems like an eternity ago that I was there. But I remember being a child and growing up and reading these Dr. Seuss books and just allowing my imagination to just run wild and have fun. And at the same time, listen, it was educational, right? I'm learning to read and I'm partaking in all these different stories. Your books seem exactly like that, right? Very, very closely related. And I think that is so amazing and such a credence to the author that you are.
Well, you've really touched on something, because I think kids need to realize your mind is your playground. Mm-hmm. And if you want to find out who you are really in life, follow your curiosity and follow your questions. And it's fun. You don't have to say everything, or you don't have to do anything you think, but really let your mind be your playground. And the kids somehow just relate to this, and they love making these associations and just the inferences that we make. I mean, you can just have so much fun with these books, especially this book, but I have tons of ideas on my website kind of pages for teachers and parents to do other things with this. But I'll just give you a few more examples for a second, okay? Or do you want
Absolutely.
to go into something
No, go ahead.
Well, like 4, I was having trouble with 4. I didn't exactly want to do 4 animals, so 4 legs on the animal, I mean. But she just loved parties, and she just really, really waited for that big one in July. And of course, all the kids know what I'm talking about. I never tell them the thing. So anyway, and then let me see, what are some more of them? There's 9. Oh, 9. I think that's going to be my next book. But 9 loved baseball. And he just couldn't get enough of it, and he attended baseball games all the time. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the kids, some of them know this, and some of them don't, so it's an education in baseball. But, 9 innings, 9 players on a team, and little things like that just make him go crazy. And 3 got a really, I don't think it was a very good job. She didn't like it at all, but she was pushing kids around on tricycles in the park. Actually, 6 comes to her rescue because she eventually becomes an apprentice scientist. 5 got a job working for the Olympics. And, let's see. 2 got a job teaching 2nd grade, but was too tired to do anything else. And of course, the kids get that a lot. Anyway, 12. Okay, 12 turns out to be real bossy in the beginning and all this kind of stuff. So I made 12 working for a chicken farmer, making sure that she had the right number of eggs in every dozen. But then there's another part of this story that's very important, because what happened to that clock? How did she feel? Or he feel? I don't know. I kind of do a genderless thing there, but anyway. And the clock grew lonely. And where's my numbers? Of course, the kids love to suggest ideas for the clock. But very few of them suggest what I came up with. And that was, I'll just read you the last page. Instead of hiring more exasperating numbers, she decided to hire some letters. 12 solid letters that would stand still, be quiet, and do their job. And she chose C for calm, Q for quiet, D for dignified, N for nice, and on and on. Okay, so she goes all the way through. And then we say, although at times it was hard to tell what time it really was, the clock lived happily and peacefully for a long time until S decided it could start the word for silly. And that's kind of how it ends. And the kids just get a kick, because then we go back and take a look at the words like C for calm. Well, what's the opposite of calm? Because he's going to get off that clock too. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's how it ends.
Again, here on the line with Debbie Hickman, we're discussing her book, The Exasperated Clock. Debbie, listen, this is all tremendous. I mean, again, being that as I stated before, spent some time teaching. Predominantly, I was teaching college students, but I did teach 4th graders for a year. And listen, how much I would have just loved if I had this book by my side when I was doing that, because not only, again, is it a fun ride for everybody involved, but it really, I can already tell it's such a great tool to really keep the kids engaged and all moving forward, thinking along the same lines. And it helps with that education, because listen, we know, guys, from our own experience with education, there were some times where it was probably a little difficult to stay focused, right? And to really stay on track with what was being taught. And I just remember, back in my years of education, the teachers that I gravitated towards the most were the ones that made education fun, right? Were the teachers that brought education to me and found a way to keep it interesting that kept my engagement. And I can already tell just by hearing you go through and listen, I'm going with you. You're like, oh, and then 7 came along, and I'm trying to think in my head, okay, well, what are things that relate to 7? And what are things that relate to 8 and relate to 4? So already I'm following you along on this journey that you're laying out. And I can only imagine the impact that it would have upon kids across the board, right? And listen, thank you so much, because I had a whole list of questions to go through, and you just went on a tangent and you answered all my questions without me even needing to bring them up. So I appreciate that. You made my job so easy. Now, one question that I do want to ask, because I would definitely feel remiss if I didn't bring this out before we went. Debbie, I'd love to know, what was an inspiration for you, and not only creating this book, but creating children's books across the board?
Oh, well, the inspiration came from, that's when I was on the reservation, the Navajo reservation, trying to work with those kids. And I couldn't figure out why all these math textbooks that we were reviewing were really all the same to me, and they weren't very interesting. So I got curious, and I said, well, what do real mathematicians say? What do they say about maybe anything about maybe their childhood learning? And I got lucky as heck, and I found these mathematicians who were saying, well, I see numbers as my friends. And then another one said, well, I see them as families. And I was like, wait. And those textbooks do not indicate that at all. And so, when I guess I looked at a clock, and being a teacher, I kind of thought, well, those are just statues on the clock, and why not give them some personality? I mean, hey, they're going to have emotions. They're going to have things they like, things they're good at, things they're not good at, and they're going to have bad days and good days. And, it just blossomed right after that. I mean, it was like then I started telling the story, of course, to kids, and eventually I wrote it down. And it just sparkled all over with the kids. I mean, and then I said, well, okay, I'm going to write a book for each of the numbers and what happened to them. And well, so far I'm up to 3, but every one of my subsequent stories has a number friend that comes to sort of help out with, the situations there.
Absolutely.
But, the kids are just so fantastically involved. I can't, I'll never forget the day I was walking in the parking lot of a school and I heard my name. And I'm going, what? Where's that coming from? And a kid is driving by then, and he's out the window looking at me. And he said, have you got your next book finished? And I was like, I'm working on it. Yes, soon. So the kids really respond to this stuff. You're right. I know. I wish I'd had this kind of stuff as a kid, too.
Well, there you have it. I mean, listen, Debbie, you're clearly building a following already, right? And we want to do everything that we can to help continue with that following that you have. Guys, listen, what more can be said, right? I mean, such a fun-filled journey. If this hasn't moved you, pinch yourself, okay? Because these books are absolutely incredible. And as she's already stated, listen, that's not all, guys, right? We focused on the Exasperated Clock, but Debbie went into her other titles as well. We also touched up on What's Up 7, the inside story of 10, and then 6, The Scientist, right? And also, make sure to reach out to Debbie on her Facebook page. So you can go to facebook.com, search Debbie Hickman Author, and be able to find her direct page there. Or you can also reach out to her through her email address. And that's going to be debhickman20@gmail.com. So that's DEBHICKMAN20@gmail.com. And I always want to put out this disclaimer. Listen, guys, we love putting email addresses out there. We love giving you the opportunity to reach out to our authors and, give them any words of encouragement, any words of advice. Listen, criticism, let's try to keep that down. Okay. If you have constructive criticism with a high emphasis on constructive, that is always welcomed as well. But listen, this has been an absolute delight. Get out there, pick up each one of these books, either for yourself, for your children, or for a gift for somebody else's. You surely will not be disappointed. Debbie, this has been an absolute pleasure. Such a delight having you on. Thank you once again for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction.
Well, thank you very much, Benji.